Hi.
Hi, Jessica Rose.
How are you? Good morning. Good morning, Erika.
Do you want to take me through the calendar?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So today you are meeting with Amanda.
Okay.
That is for an hour. You're doing an organization transformation meeting at 3, and then following that, trade sales, and then weekly programming. So it's kind of a light day for a Monday for you. I feel like typically your busiest days, actually, I feel like your busiest days are Tuesday, Thursday.
Hit me on the rest of the week, Jess.
All right. So on Tuesday, first thing in the morning, you have the weekly executive meeting. Big things to be discussed, I'm sure. Then joy upon joy, you have like 3 budgeting meetings back to back for like the entirety of the afternoon, pretty much. I know that's not my favorite topic, and I'm sure it's not your favorite topic either. But that's happening all day pretty much on Tuesday, and that's kind of your day on Tuesday is just budgeting.
And then the revenue meetings.
And then revenue meetings.
So it's all about money on Tuesday.
All about money. On Wednesday, you have a few interviews, and then you have the weekly creative services meetings to go over everything with the content team. Lots of content to be pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of exciting new projects. Thursday morning, you have a breakfast meeting with WME, which will be exciting. You also have another engagement meeting, and you also have another podcast that I think is actually moving. They just hit me up. So I think we are moving that podcast, but that's the Let Me Save You 25 Years podcast. So lots of podcast recordings this week. And then the following day, I actually don't know what this is. The 1 year later film thing.
Oh my God.
You put that there. So sometimes what happens is she puts stuff and then I have to ask because I don't know what that is.
Do you know what that is?
I have no idea.
I made that in my calendar a year ago because that was the day, that was the first day I showed up in the office. It wasn't the day I started, but I had shown up in the office and I took a video and there was no one here and like the morale was terrible and there was no one working here. And I was like, a year later, I have to film the video.
Okay. Well,
so that's fun.
Go.
Okay. That's great.
Good to know. Maybe we should push that a day back.
Well, we don't need to keep it on the calendar. It's just a note to self.
Okay.
And then I have like 3,000 one-on-ones.
And then you have 3,000 one-on-ones. And that's,
all right. That's
your
the
week this week.
All
actually
right.
kind of a light week. This week is not so crazy. I'm sure it'll get crazier closer too, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I
Awesome.
appreciate it. All right, welcome back to Work. This is our podcast about work. We talk about life at work. We talk about being great at work. We talk about messing up at work. We talk about when life and things go wrong with work. So all that kind of stuff, you can come here every week to watch and listen to that and more. Big things coming into the week. I'm deep into the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I'm like 100 years late, but I love it. I have to like bite size watch it because it is so long. Peter Jackson is a fucking genius. Like the cinematography is amazing. And I'm obviously creating all these like analogies in my head between Frodo and the ring and the unsuspecting heroes and the kings having to submit to the greater king of man and the journey and the evil. There's a whole bunch of things you can learn about work from Lord of the Rings. I'm trying to think about that now. The biggest one is that it's a journey. I just got out of a tech review. We hired these tech consultants and this morning was like the dun, 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 when they give you the whole, like, here's the state of the state on your technology, which is like an F-. And I kept thinking about like Frodo and the ring because it is a journey. And I think one of the hardest things about work is thinking about where you are and what you want to do and knowing that even though you can do most anything, a lot of it you probably just shouldn't do. And so the understanding of like where and when and how you put in your effort, what you decide to put effort into versus what you don't, it's a big thing to think about. I think it's a big thing for people to think about with their career. It's a big thing to think about with projects. I'm kind of struggling because we have so much to fix at Food 52. And I'm not talking like little things or bugs or this, that, and the other thing. Like we've got to rebuild the websites. We have to fix the back end. We pay for like an ungodly amount of software. And it's like, which pieces and parts of that do we fix? What's worth fixing? What's not worth fixing? And sometimes I think you can get like really lost in all of the fixing, like all of the fixing of yourself, all of the fixing of your job, all the fixing of your relationships, that you kind of forget why you're fixing everything in the first place. And so I had a 90-minute meeting with them this morning, and I'm like, God, I don't want to get lost in all the iterative progress. I want to make progress, but I really want progress to accomplish something greater. And so I think that's a big thing I'm thinking about this week. And I think that's a big thing that everybody kind of tackles in their life and with their career. And the biggest piece of it that I got to with our tech review is I was like, what are we actually trying to achieve? And we're trying to 3x the demand for this business. And when you put things in that framework, everything falls away, or the stuff that you shouldn't be doing falls away. And the stuff that is really important becomes very apparent. And so that's kind of the theme of today's episode, which is figuring out what's important, figuring out where you should put your energy, figuring out where your time is best spent is one of the most important exercises you can take on at work. You just saw Jess and I going through my calendar. Like sometimes I take a step back and look at my calendar and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing all week? Like, what is this adding up to? Which of these meetings are pivotal to getting us to the place we want to go and to the company we want to be, and which of it is just a waste of time? And so that's something I struggle with. That's something I think about all the time. And that's something that we will talk about in this podcast. So that's kind of my thinking for the week. My tip going into the week is one of the things that I've started doing on Sundays is when I'm scrolling around TikTok or I'm scrolling around Instagram, I'm now starting to collect, I don't know what's happening in my feed, but it's all like creator hacks with AI. And I'm making myself a list of all the pieces of AI technology, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Gemma, whether it's Leonardo, there's all different, what do you call them even?
Different, just AI.
Yeah. So there's all different AI, and really making a list of what are the things I need to teach myself about AI. I had this bananas conversation yesterday where someone was like, you're going to ruin the Food 52 photography with AI. And I'm like, I'm not going to fucking ruin the Food 52 photography with AI. But any person thinking about visual merchandising, anybody thinking about design, anyone thinking about content creation right now has to understand the place that technology can get it to in order to understand what the potential could or might be. And I'm eager to do that. So one thing I'm carving out in my schedule and with my time is to make time to be a student and make time to be a student of AI. And if I had any piece of advice for anybody in the workforce in 2025, it is to make time to be a student of AI. It's not AI that's going to put people out of jobs. It's people who can use AI. I found something yesterday about an AI that helps you write decks. And I'm like, God, if I could just actually stop scribbling images on paper for strategies and have a computer or piece of technology do that for me, I would be so much more efficient. So that's my tip for this week. And that's what I'm working on.
Now work.
So speaking of current events and AI, obviously AI is everywhere in the news. You see DeepSeek, is doing what ChatGPT did with bajillions of dollars for $5 million. There's going to be this arms race around AI. It's only going to get more pervasive. It's only going to become, I would argue, probably more sinister. But long story short, AI isn't going anywhere. And it's really the question of, can humans keep control of it, and how do humans put it to use? One of the biggest things I'm seeing in the workforce is that people are afraid of AI. I think they don't understand AI. I think people diminish and disparage what they don't know and understand, and AI is no exception. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty to criticize about AI, and I think that will only come to life more in the future. I think actually interesting, like looking at the arc of Mark Zuckerberg, like, is Mark Zuckerberg evil or not right now? Like, I don't know. Is Sam Altman evil or not right now? I don't know. But what I do know is that just like when the internet showed up, right? I started my career around the time the internet showed up. And the internet was really nascent and nobody understood it. I remember working at Fidelity for this lady named Joanne, not my Joanne. Joanne was a print buyer and smoked like 6,000 cigarettes a day and like went to a martini lunch like 4 times a week. She was awesome, but she loved print. And she was like, I can't be bothered with the internet. I don't understand the internet. The internet is a terrible, dark, dirty, gross, disgusting little place. That's no place for Fidelity investment. I would argue today in 2025, the biggest vehicle for marketing for Fidelity Investments is obviously digital. So for me, that was a lucky break because I got into something at an early stage. And I think we're at a lucky break moment, which is the people who grow up with AI, harnessing AI, using AI will be most successful. And the older folks like myself, like anybody listening to this, yes, you're older if you're in your 20s and 30s, you got to like teach the dog new tricks and you've got to figure out how to use it. So it's obviously a big topic. I think there'll be a lot of drama about it. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, is figure out how can AI help you with tasks, right? I read something yesterday morning about how getting AI to give you a summary of your local news, of national news, of news related to your sectors. I set up something this morning to just give me alerts on what all Food 52 competitors are doing. So you can use AI to help you. Don't be scared of it. Don't diminish it. Don't disparage it. The people who do that are going to be left behind because the world is already moving very fast and it is only going to move much, 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 much faster.
Next, we have Spotify's HR chief says remote staff aren't children as company sticks to work from home anywhere policy. This was big in news the first week of January.
I have a lot of opinions about this. So Spotify has a mega billboard somewhere. I actually think it's in New York City. It is in New York City, right? All right. Spotify has a huge billboard in New York City that says, our employees aren't children. We're not going to tell them where to work. I think this is so arrogant. I actually don't understand why Spotify would do this. I don't understand why you would put a stake in the ground. The only thing I can think of is that they're trying to recruit engineers and people who don't want to work at Google, don't want to work at Facebook, don't want to work any of the places where you have to go back to work. But I think it's a super childish, speaking of children, I think it's a super, super childish position because one, at some point in time when Spotify sees productivity go down, when Spotify sees attrition increase, when Spotify sees company morale and malaise kind of taking over, when Spotify starts to falter, or when we see a new big mega music startup, come up or creep up out of nowhere, Spotify is going to be like, oop, everybody has to return to work. And then they look like assholes for putting all of that money into that billboard. Like, I think it's just a funny thing for the Spotify HR people to do. Obviously, they're tapping into something, which is people don't want to go to work. That said, for technology companies, for innovating companies, for companies that want to get out of their comfort zones and grow and explore, I think it is a very bold statement. And I actually think it's one that they're going to regret. All right, what's next?
So Trump is in office, and one of the few executive orders that he signed is ending remote work for all federal employees.
All right, so speaking of, like, Facebook people have to go back to work, Amazon people have to go back to work, and now if you work for the federal government, you have to go back to work. I don't think this is hugely controversial. I actually think in the spirit of putting tax dollars to work, it's good for federal employees to go into the office. I think the federal government needs to innovate and become more nimble, become more efficient, become more adept, become more versed in the world as it is today, and working together, collaborating, solving problems together, connecting with other human beings is part of that. So, people love Trump, people hate Trump. Who knows what Trump is going to end up doing? I actually think there's going to be this huge delta between just what comes out of Trump's mouth and actually what happens in the world, which I think is going to be really interesting to follow. And I could be wrong on that. But I think it's great for people to go back to work. Doesn't matter what sector you work in. And I don't think the federal government should be an exception to getting more impactful work, becoming more innovative, constantly refining and improving yourselves. And that's just tough to do over Zoom.
Now work.
All right, we're back. We're doing generational knowledge. We have a very special guest, Lindsey Metselaar. She's the host of We Met at Acme, which is a dating podcast you should be listening to if you're not already. So hi, Lindsey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Lindsey just told me that she eats cottage cheese on scrambled eggs, which is moderately blown my mind. Actually, let's just talk about that for 2 seconds.
Let's talk about it.
Huge cottage cheese girl.
I'm a huge cottage cheese girl, but I used to hate it.
Same.
It's gross. Let's be honest. The texture is
What
gross.
is it?
It's lumps. It's like curd cheese.
Okay, it's like when the cheese is strained and like the fatty parts are left.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
But it's such a good source of protein. And you know how protein is like the hot thing
Yeah,
right
and it's
now.
impossible to find.
It's impossible to find. But if you have cottage cheese, it's a quick source of protein. Throw it on the top of your eggs.
Okay, so Lindsey makes scrambled eggs. You make the scrambled eggs, and then you take the cold cottage cheese and you like spread it on top like it's like a
I just
jelly.
kind of dump it. No,
You
I just
dump
kind
it.
of dump it. Yeah.
Okay, and then you just yum, eat it up.
That's it. And a side of berries, crucial.
Mixed berries.
Yes. It kind of just like it puts all the flavors together.
Okay, I love that. And the Good Culture is your brand of choice.
Good Culture, whole milk, organic. Sponsor me. I love you guys.
Okay, and then before we get into it, tell us about your podcast.
My podcast is called We Met at Acme. It's been 8 years since I created it in 2017. And it's all about dating, relationships, now a little bit marriage, kids, sex post kids, all the things that come up when it comes to dating. You never stop dating, even if you're married.
I think that's a great principle, actually. When you stop dating and you're married, you're kind of fucked. I think that's like a big thing.
It's true.
Like
it's
you still have to make out with the people. You
do.
gotta be making out.
People
always.
do not make out.
You
with their partners.
You gotta commit to making out.
You gotta make out.
Making out's important.
Yeah, it's true. I agree.
Jessica Rose, do you think making out is important? Making out is important.
It might be more important than sex.
It's the most important thing is making out. Making out is a gateway. It's a gateway to anything.
To everything. Yeah,
I agree.
Do you make out on a first date?
Ooh. No, I'm not a make out on the first date.
A lot of people don't. But it's okay. But if it doesn't happen by the second date, then it's not.
Yeah, if you're
okay,
not making out in the second date, you have no chemistry. It's not happening.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's like all or nothing. You got to go like all the way, or it's like
not
get
all
out
the
of there.
way.
Well, on your first date or on your second date?
Neither. You can't go all the way. Are we talking
It depends.
sex?
All right. That's like a different podcast. All right. We're going to come back to this. I'm going to go on Lindsey's podcast. We're going to talk about this. The question we're answering today is work and social media. And do you let your boss follow you on social? And how do you handle that?
Okay, so for you have now been a boss for a while. How did you feel? I feel like it's almost you had to follow each other in your case.
Well,
and now maybe things are different.
I thank God, I'm not a religious person, but that there was no social media when I was in my 20s. Like if my bosses had followed me in my 20s, I'd be screwed and decidedly not here right now. At Barstool, it was very organic because that was our business. Like everybody followed everybody on social media. I don't know how, as an employee, you would dictate if your boss follows you or not. I guess if you're private, you decide if you accept them, but
you can't not accept them. That's like a faux pas.
I don't think you can do that.
You can't leave your boss waiting to be
100%.
But you, in the interim, if you're private, you can tailor your Instagram and then accept them. You can get rid of the bad things. But that's kind of sad that you'd have to change your.
You have to hide who you are.
You can mute your boss.
Is that true?
No, you can't. Sorry. You can block them from your stories.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so then that's the play.
Right, that's the play.
Your feed has your like PG life and your stories is the like sexier version of your
Accept
life.
Your boss. Block them from your stories because that's what's really going on.
What about if it's a prospective employer? So you're interviewing for a job, you have a manager you've just met with, then they try to follow you on social.
No.
I think that's creepy on the manager's part.
Yeah, creepy on the manager, and you
also none of your business.
None of your business, and you have no obligation to accept that.
Yep.
That's an invasion of privacy.
Agree. I think that's creepy. And then what about you quit your job, you get fired from your job? Do you block your boss? How do you manage that?
No. Well, it's funny. I've been fired.
Okay.
And
how was it?
It was traumatizing.
Yeah.
Have you been fired?
I've been laid off.
Okay.
Were you fired or laid off?
I was fired.
Like fired.
Escorted out of the building.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, fired.
What'd you do wrong?
I really fucked up. I've actually talked about this on my podcast before, so I'm just going to go into it. I was working for a very powerful man in the music industry.
Okay.
And I was his assistant.
Okay.
And we were in New York, and he was traveling to LA for business. And I was meant to organize his calendar while he was in LA.
Mhm.
But I was 21, 22.
Highly irresponsible.
Highly irresponsible. Had no idea about the time. Like, I didn't understand the time difference.
Yeah.
I didn't understand
Yeah.
where anything was in LA. Like
100%.
the layouts,
How long it would take to
nothing.
get from point A to
Nothing.
point B. Yep.
And he had a meeting with a very, very big deal of a person who was about to make a huge career change that is still huge to this day. And her mom and Larry Rudolph, who everyone in the music world knows. That's the only name I'll say because the other ones will be too revealing. And and we had originally been back and forth between Soho House, West Hollywood, and his office.
Okay.
And ultimately we decided his office, but I put Soho West Hollywood.
Okay.
Soho House West Hollywood. And he went to the wrong location for the meeting. And it was like the biggest meeting of his career.
Yep.
And he was rightfully so livid.
Yep.
And like, I get it. You know, that's a real big
fired on the
fuck up.
spot?
Fired on the spot. He, on his way to the actual location, sent an email like, Lindsey's done, escort her out. And then emailed the whole company while I was still on the company email. Be like saying basically the same thing. Mm-hmm.
Didn't get screamed at though. He didn't scream. Did he scream at you?
Oh yeah, he also called me and screamed at me. Yeah. And said fuck a lot of times.
Yeah.
And like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Yeah. But then the reason I brought this up in the first place, then after I was fired, he followed me on Instagram.
That's creepy. Did you say yes?
I was public. I was always public.
Do you prune through who follows you and kind of get people off there?
Honestly, no. Not really. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
You know?
I'm kind of in that same boat.
If you're going to be public, you can't be
you got to be
one
or the other. You got to be one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you get fired, you either decide to block your boss or you're like, fuck it, I don't care.
You just like remove them as a follower. I feel like that's the PG.
Yeah, right. You don't need to
way.
go the blocking route.
Right. Or they'll probably unfollow you.
I think so. Like I sometimes find people in my feed where I'm like, oh geez, I forgot I was following you. Like unfollow.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Now work.
All right, George is back. Hi, George.
Hello.
Hello. We invited George back because he was just so fabulous in describing and defining EBITDA in a way that I could actually understand it. We're going to talk about GAAP financials. So, George, what does GAAP financials mean? What does GAAP stand for?
GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles.
And it's always in caps. It's an acronym.
It's always in caps. It's a very important acronym.
Okay. Companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers, Cooper, Deloitte, blah, 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 Anderson, something or another, they live by this 4-letter acronym. It's what keeps them in business.
They live by this framework referred to by this acronym.
Okay, great. It's a framework. Describe the framework.
So one of the things that is really important when judging companies and comparing them is that they have an audit firm come in and validate their controls, the accuracy of their reporting, and that, most importantly, the companies are following key rules. The cardinal rule there's a couple, but the most cardinal rule is this idea of the matching principle. So your revenue has to be recognized in the period that it's earned, and your expenses have to be reflected in the period.
Revenue.
Yeah, you have to match your expenses with the revenue so that you can't manipulate the numbers. Then there's also a ton of rules, and it's different by sector or industry based on what the revenue recognition policies should be. So for companies, for Food 52, for the commerce side of the business, you have to have fulfilled your obligation to the customer.
So we at Food 52 can't count revenue until we ship you that mug, and that mug arrives at George's house.
And until that mug is scanned by UPS.
And it's in the truck.
It's in the truck. It's on the way.
Then it's like, not my problem.
Exactly. And then on the media,
just kidding. It is our problem, and we want to make sure people get their stuff.
It's very much our problem, and something we work very hard to ensure
we make sure it gets to your door.
Happens within the time frame,
once it gets there.
And that the PDP is right. We ensure that as well. But I think that the way to think about it is, you have scandals like Enron. You have scandals like...
People who listen to this are too young to know what happened with Enron, so explain what happened with Enron.
Enron was this, at the time in the late 90s when I was in college, Enron was one of the exciting competitors to Wall Street on where you wanted to work. Enron unfortunately was a public company running an illegal pyramid scheme.
So it was like Bernie Madoff, but corporatized.
Exactly. Bernie Madoff, but corporatized and of a bigger scale. That's the scandal of, the early aughts. There's also scandals from 100 years ago, which is why Gap exists, right? And it's sort of like, okay, companies, I'm sure back in...
People cook their books. Gap is like, hey, people, don't cook your books. And what the Treasury, like what branch of the government dictates this? That's a good question, huh?
That is a great question. It's the Financial Accounting Standards Board, also known as FASB within the industry.
FASB. Okay.
It's the coolest acronym.
Yeah, that's a good acronym for the most boring shit ever. Okay. Who do you think gets out of college and they're like, I want to go work at FASB?
Coincidentally,
George.
I probably would have wanted to. I studied accounting in undergrad, but then I saw that Wall Street was probably a better path.
Yeah, a little bit more lucrative than FASB. But okay. So FASB indicates what the standard and accepted accounting principles are by industry, sector, blah, 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 whatever. Then big companies like Deloitte or just accountants or firms like yours.
Or PwC, our auditor here at Food 52.
Shout out PwC. Thank you very much. I'm sure you're thrilled. PwC is like, hey, I'm gonna look at what your finance people and your accountants do all year. And the reason this exists is to ensure that companies and CEOs and CFOs are not cooking the books. So you're not lying about how much money you make, how much money you spend. Somebody is checking your work in terms of the money.
Yeah, it's almost the same as EBITDA. People have to make sure every company is using the same rules. Obviously, there's different ways to be what's called GAAP compliant. So if you're like hitting the marks on GAAP, it's called you're GAAP compliant. If you're not and you're not following the standards, you're not GAAP compliant.
So when you got to Barstool Sports, was Barstool Sports GAAP compliant? I doubt it.
There's different types of standards. We were GAAP compliant within
the lowest standard,
a certain rung, but we had to shift the level of our audit when the Penn transaction came into play.
And is Food 52 GAAP compliant?
It is.
Great.
It is. That's one thing that's been really exciting is the accounting team has worked really hard to have clean books.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really important. You know what? Accountants get no shine, but it's a huge fucking job.
It's a huge job.
And it's like the only job that matters.
The accuracy of the financials.
How you categorize things, understanding where the money goes.
Exactly. And I think it's good because I think a lot of companies, if they were left to their own devices, they would just report on cash basis.
Yeah. And it forces a company to look. It forces a company through a prism or a filter that's like, this isn't right.
Exactly. It's like, is your P&L accurate?
Yeah.
And I think it really is one of the biggest foundations of business. Mm-hmm. Like I used to, in undergrad, having studied accounting and finance, accounting is the language of business. Mm-hmm. Even EBITDA, revenue, how companies are valued are all based on accounting and the standards and the consistency and that they've been vetted and that they've been audited.
Did you know that my mother is an accounting teacher?
I knew that both your parents were educators.
Yes, my mother teaches accounting, which probably explains why I can hardly add.
No one can read a P&L like you, but it's in an untraditional lens.
Oh, how do I read a P&L? Tell me. You have to. This is
all
fun.
right. Well, you read a P&L like you better hit the number.
That's true.
And
I read a P&L like a story.
You read a P&L like this story, and I think it's a reflection of your vision. I think the areas that you're most focused on are revenue and sales and pushing the team towards goals, because we're all pushing towards a revenue target. I think also gross margin is super important to you for both the ad business and the commerce business. And how to influence that, I think, really excites you and interests you. And then, of course, hitting EBITDA is most critical, because you know that that's the most important metric for our investors.
Do you find that most CEOs that you work with, or most companies you work with, like, you lob over your accountant's spreadsheet and they like read it, and like, we're not like that here?
Right. No, I think that we have a lot of work to do in the P&L review department, just because we're building out this infrastructure from scratch, and we're bringing together these different companies that still have different accounting systems.
That's got to be stressful for you.
It's not stressful, but it makes the simple difficult. So I think that is sort of like, I think we could enhance the way we review the P&L. And I think in 2025, that should be the goal. I remember at Barstool, for example, it was very different. Like Barstool, people have no idea how brilliant everyone that works at Barstool.
They're so smart.
And
we were minting money.
And yeah, we were highly profitable.
It was not hard to make money there.
It was not hard.
It was such a luxury.
People really connected with the platform because everyone was so authentic.
Yeah. And the people there, like, they're not pedigree smart, but they were fucking smart. Exactly. Everybody who worked at Barstool was so smart.
Everyone worked there. So at Barstool, what I did when I started owning the budget for you, I went through every single line of the P&L and I put a name. And I was like, I get this number from this person. And they have to deliver this number. And it was really easy.
How's it work here?
Here, it's difficult to create that system because it does not exist. And we have two accounting systems.
And there's so many different owners who own sort of a line item.
There's multiple people who think that they could own a line item. And sometimes it might be allocated to the person that's not really the decision maker. We've also had so much change, right? We've had 7 of the 10 people on leadership are new and started in 2024.
Yeah, it's hard.
So it's like, it's a bit of shape shifting on who owns what.
But it also is a really good point that I think a company's accounting and its ability to have good books is how easy or hard that is to achieve. You don't have any choice. You got to get to the GAAP financials. You have to get to an EBITDA number. But how much chaos sits on top of that has an immense bearing.
That's such a great point. I would give our accounting audit work an A, but in terms of it being managerial, that's what it completely is lacking. And that's the work that we've been trying to do over the last year. And that's a big part of the work to do is, yes, you can pass an audit, but if I showed you our audited financials, you would say, whose business is this? Because it doesn't require the level of detail on gross margin for commerce, gross margin for school health. It just would say gross margin.
Period. Lump sum. Yes.
SG&A or selling general and administrative expenses. Period. And so you have to peel back a layer. I think the way the systems were designed was so that we could pass an audit.
Yep.
And I think
and now we're going to evolve to having a system to manage a business.
Exactly.
That's great. All right.
Now work.
It's time for strategery. Just as a reminder, this is the section where we talk about corporate mumbo jumbo and all those buzzwords your annoying coworkers insist on using every day. I worked with this guy at a company who acquired a company I worked at, and he used so many strategery words that it became like an open discussion. Anyways, I can't stand strategery words. I am guilty of using them, which I realize is hypocrisy. But the word we're going to talk about today is low-hanging fruit. So I think we talked about circle back.
Last episode was circle back.
All right. So last episode, we talked about circle back. This episode, we're talking about low-hanging fruit. What is low-hanging fruit? Low-hanging fruit is easy, simple things that you can get done. And it's a way of encapsulating small tasks that theoretically you're doling out or assigning to people. What's annoying about low-hanging fruit is that there are some people who just dwell in low-hanging fruit land and they never get to the like bigger, more complex tasks, or to the earlier discussion today, the tasks that they do complete don't ever add up to anything. So the translation for low-hanging fruit is, let's start with the easiest tasks to make it look like we're making progress. A study by the Journal of Applied Psychology found that focusing on low-hanging fruit, so focusing on the easy things, made it easy to boost morale by making people feel like they were having quick wins. I am a big believer in small tasks to boost morale. Like, I do it for myself all day long. I'm a big believer of like, start with the small things and get to the big things. But what they also found is it's a way of avoiding more complex or bigger issues. So that's low-hanging fruit.
Now work.
All right, so our last segment is what I'm struggling with at work, which I feel like I opened the podcast with about 6,000 things I'm struggling with. One thing I am thinking about is one-on-ones. So I end up, you saw it in the calendar, with like, I don't know, some combination of like 10 one-on-ones per week, probably between 7 and 10 one-on-ones. They show up in the middle of my calendar. So I've got like 2 mega meetings or 2 random meetings. And I find that the context switching for one-on-ones is really, really, really tough, where it's hard to move from a meeting that is with a bunch of people where you're trying to make bigger things happening, you're having debate, you're having dialogue, to moving into a more intimate setting with just one person. So I don't know that I'm great at one-on-ones. I would actually say I'm probably not great at one-on-ones. The other reason I'm struggling with one-on-ones is, I don't know if it's me, but I think one-on-ones have a little bit become just the opportunity to complain. And as a manager, it goes both ways. It's either an opportunity to complain, or it's the manager just piling more work on the person. But it's hard to strike the balance. Like, I find I get into a lot of one-on-ones and it's like, let me just like get hit with all your problems. I also find myself going into one-on-ones and being like, you need to do this, 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 you need to do this. When I joined Food 52, someone here had recommended this like 3 Ps. There was like some construct for there was some construct for the one-on-ones that was actually really sharp. It was problems, I think it was people, and it was progress. My problem is I lack the discipline every week to go in and fill out, what are the 3 problem things? What are the 3 progress things? What are the 3 people things? But I am looking for and soliciting any type of advice anybody may have on how to have a great one-on-one and how to create a better balance so that it's a good point in time to connect with someone on a human level. It's a good point in time to get a health check of how someone's doing in their business, and to not lose sight of the bigger thing you're trying to achieve together. That's where I'm struggling, is like the loss of sight of what are we here to do in the first place? Because I think people just tend to be kind of negative, and it all, for me anyways, I find that people always, it turns into something that's personal, like so-and-so stinks, or such and such person isn't responding to emails, or such and such group is an idiot, or are idiots, and blah, blah, blah. Like, I want to find a way to either not have one-on-ones, being totally honest, and maybe I'm just getting old, or I want to find a way to have one-on-ones that are more purposeful and ultimately more valuable. And I am open to any advice on that. So that's today's episode. We will see you back here next Monday. Before we let you go, we would like you to call us. If you want to quit your job, if you've just quit your job, maybe you were laid off, and we want you to let us have it and tell us what you wish you could tell your manager in your exit interview, or what you wish you could say about your company to your company before you leave out the door. So it's anonymous. Don't say your name. Don't use people's names, but do tell us what you think. And all you have to do is call 1-866-85-ASK-ERIKA or 866-852-7537. So call 866-852-7537 and let us have it. Or if you can figure out the letters, call 1-800-85-ASK-ERIKA.
Yep. And they will be completely anonymous. We will make sure that they are altered. The audio is all. Yeah. And nobody will know, but the world will know your frustration. So feel free to leave us.
What's more satisfying than that? It's like the new Glassdoor.
Yeah. Lovely. Great.
All right. Thank you for listening.